Welcome to Boswell Book Company's virtual event series. It is 4,603 of us being in business. We're very honored to be hosting tonight Uwem Akpan, the author of New York, My Village. He is the author of the prize-winning story collection, Say You're One of Them, winner of the Commonwealth Writers Prize, the Penn Open Book Prize, and the Hurston Wright Legacy Award. His writing has appeared in the New Yorker, the Nigerian Guardian, and the Oprah magazine, and his collection, Say You're One of Them, was a 2009 Oprah Book Club section. His new book, New York, My Village, is winning raves everywhere, including from our own bookseller, Jenny Chu, who has said, it is a rare work of literary fiction that leaves readers wondering if the war against those stealthy insects known as bed bugs can ever really be won. After finishing Uwem Akpan's shrewd, felt and ultimately delightful novel, New York, My Village, I turned that question over in my mind for a while before shifting my thoughts to war in general and the scars left behind, even if the battles end and a victor is declared. We are so honored tonight to be having Akpan in conversation with Elias Rodriguez, who is an assistant professor of African-American literature at Sarah Lawrence. He has been published in such venues as The Guardian and The Nation. And he is also the author of a recent novel, All the Water I've Seen Is Running, which has also won amazing reviews, including this in Publishers Weekly, who wrote, this melancholy story is a startling and necessary addition to the canon of works that parse what it means to grow up in the American South. Thank you both for joining us. We're honored to have you. Welcome virtually to more.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel.
Uwem, I believe we talked about you reading for a little bit.
Yes.
Mike, over to you.
Yes. So thanks, Elias, for accepting to do this for me. I'm very grateful, and congratulations. Your wonderful book. It's really something. The scene I want to read from is one of the beginning scenes in the book. My protagonist has been to the embassy to get his American visa to come over to New York. They denied him the first day. He cried, he felt humiliated and everything. He decided to go the second day, 3 months later. Western embassies in developing countries are just crime scenes. What can happen to you in these embassies? It's complicated. Anyway, my protagonist is in the process of being denied a second time. And that's where I want to read from you. My interviewer said those were two different things and accused me of dishonesty. He wrote something down on a piece of paper and seemed to underline or cancel it 100 times. Then he abruptly stood up, excused himself, and left the booth with my passport. The Black interviewer was squeezing a young man heading to college in Montana on a scholarship. The boy said the school had offered to pay his flight ticket. He wore white flip-flops and red socks and a pink Kasina Taokang and yellow shorts. He was color blocking. For no Nigerian ethnic group dressed like that. But what stood out for me was the way he had bleached his skin. Whatever creams he was using had lightened it almost to the color of his nails, except around his knuckles and elbows and knees and lips. They stood out like black islands on a sea of whitening skin and intensified the color scheme of his total appearance. The interviewer asked him what he knew of Montana in the US. Without blinking, he replied the place was more tropical than Nigeria, never snowed, and belonged to the grandfather of Joe Montana, the American footballer. When the man nodded and smiled and approved the visa, it was further confirmation the whole process was pure bullshit. The successful applicant gathered his things and thanked his interviewer profusely. Then the boy turned and bowed to other applicants behind us. They responded with smiles and thumbs ups. Sashaying into the main hall, he lost it altogether and started to sing, holding up the slip like a winning lottery ticket. Then he stopped and put everything down on the floor and started dancing to Alanta moves, then Azonto moves, then Dombolo, and then back to Alanta moves. His footwork was impossibly intricate and caught security completely by surprise. But the hall was cheering, urging him to register for America's Got Talent. Even the Black consular officer abandoned his current interview of a young mother and her son, loosened his tie, pointed at the dancer, and broke into a crazy laugh. When the hall caught on to the diplomat's blatant breach of diplomatic embassy protocol, applause rang out, loud and sustained and solemn. Some stood up. It was like church. However, this really got security mad. They tackled the dancer and bundled him out into the rain. Just for the benefit of my listeners, embassy officials never smile. They're trained to be very serious when they're trying to give you this visa. They are menacing. They really intimidate you. So to have one of them laugh like this, that's why the whole place rose and clapped for him for being human. The little boy peed on himself. The mother wept and searched for the restroom with her eyes. Their interviewer stopped laughing and left the booth. When the urine spread towards the mother's shoes, because this boy was very, very nervous and afraid of these officials, the boy squatted and pushed her mother away and covered his face with both hands. Before I could react, security and cleaners arrived and screened them off in a yellow contraption that smelled of chlorine, then dragged the whole thing to the restroom. As the PA brought us back to the embassy we knew, cleaners mopped and air freshened the spot in the most efficient of operations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful to hear. For those of you who have not read much about the book or read about the book, what I really loved about this passage that you chose is that it is a really beautiful encapsulation of so much about the book. It's funny and also deeply sad, often in the same sentence or in the same paragraph. It's carefully attentive to all of the sort of difficulties that one encounters when moving through a number of institutions. And this is ultimately a book, again, for those of you who haven't read the book, this is ultimately a book about a Nigerian man who wins the Toni Morrison Fellowship to work at a publishing house on editing an anthology on the Biafran War in Nigeria. And he travels from Nigeria to New York, wherein, hilarious and deeply depressing hijinks ensue. And what I found really interesting about this embassy scene, and what I think really, really stuck with me about it, is not just your careful attention to all the different ways that embassies can come to affect all different kinds of people, but also that it's in a way in the book at all. I mean, one could have imagined the Nigeria scene or the Nigeria section of the book being much longer, or the book starting in America. So I wanted to know, why did you start with the embassy, and what were you interested in there in that sort of early section of the book?
Because I Okay, first of all, let me welcome our audience again.
I should have welcomed everyone also. Welcome, everyone.
Welcome, everyone. I've seen that my brother Mfan has joined from Nigeria to listen to this. So my family is here. I wanted the international community, especially the big Western countries who run these embassies in developing countries, to have a sense what it means for our people to be there in those embassies. A lot of them who have read the book, Elias, are very shocked, enraged by what I have just shown them. Because since they are Americans and English and German and French and Chinese, they do not get to see what their embassies are like in these developing countries. Okay, most of them, they don't even need visas to go to the developing countries. When they get there, the airport, they just buy it $25 and they're allowed in, because those are poor countries who need tourists. Anyway, so I wanted to put this before the international community, that embassies are crime scenes. You get there, it's so race conscious, it's so humiliating. When you get there, when I used to go to embassy, you'll spend like 5 hours before it would be your turn. Those 5 hours, you cannot get outside. You cannot eat. You can only pee and drink water. Okay. So, Elias, this might shock you. I had already received 2 visas from American embassy without any incident. And then the 3rd time I went, I wanted to go to writing school, Michigan, 2004. I stood by that counter and I was asked to write a short story before I could be given a visa. I mean, so I thought it was a joke. And I'm like, look, Michigan has read my short stories. They say I'm good enough. They've given me scholarship to come, But this man wouldn't hear. He said, write a short story here. I'd never felt that humiliated in life. But what could I do? I put on a poker face, maybe a smile, because my choices were few at that point. And I started to figure out what to write, because he actually gave me pen and paper to write. After 15 minutes of him heckling me, what next? Have you done it? Why is it taking so long? He finally came up with 2 useless sentences and gave to him. And he said, so what next? What next? What next? So I've always had that experience in my heart. You can see that what I've written is different from that experience. But I know the feel of that embassy. I know how our people, whether it's your people in Jamaica or people in Cambodia or Kenya, Nigeria, I know how we feel about these things. So I wanted to bring it to where it matters. Because, when we see this so-called caravan coming from South America to the southern border, many Americans, because they don't have the knowledge, they say, why don't they go to the embassies in those countries? Why don't they? They've got no chance. It's anyway, these were the reasons I wanted to begin, as it were, from the beginning.
From the beginning, yes, from the beginning. So many of us. I should say also, I'm going to ask some more questions, but if you have any questions that are prompted by Uwem's comments, feel free to put those in the chat and I'll be happy to read those at any point. But yes, that was such a beautiful and careful answer, because I think that you're right. There's such a deep violence in those places that people have to undergo. But that is not the end of the story, right? In this book, after 1 failed attempt, I think only 1, he eventually, maybe 2, I can't remember.
Twice.
2 failed attempts. He gets the visa, and then we have this sort of amazing New York scene, which ends up taking up most of the book, where he arrives in New York and is sort of getting used to the place. And one of the things I think that works, incredibly well about the book is your eye for both, right? Both New York and the Nigerian embassy, as well as the area around the embassy. And I was struck by just how careful your vision was and how careful your sentences were that were constructing this place so often that I really felt like I could see everything that was there. So I was curious if you could talk a little bit about, how it is that you came to write this book and what led you to write this book, because your vision of all these places is so clearly marked by such a deep knowledge.
Thank you. I want to say immediately that I've been coming and going and living in the US since 1993. That's a long time. Mm-hmm. And I always thought I would write an immigrant story, someone coming from Nigeria. In this case, someone coming from my tribe, the Anangs. We're a minority of minority in Nigeria. The big tribes are the Igbos, the Yorubas, the Hausas. They're like 30 million people each. I think we are like, is it 1 million or 1.5? I don't know. And there are like 497 other tribes like mine, some even smaller. So now, Elias, I'm sure you never knew of my tribe until you read my book.
Not going to answer that question.
I know you're from Jamaica, and I was making fun of you earlier on. You might be my 12th cousin. You have come from my village in Nigeria to Jamaica. Anyway, I've always wanted to write about my own ethnic group because in America, people would ask me, "Are you Yoruba?" I say no. "Are you Igbo?" I say no. "Are you Hausa?" I say no. So they just changed the topic. I could as well be from Namibia or the Middle East. That's all people know here. So we don't even exist, which is what I tried to do in that embassy scene, to get the Anangs to actually exist. Because if you don't exist, the day the world wakes up to exterminate you, nobody will miss you. Nobody will know that you even existed. So I've always wanted to do that and to talk about what Biafra war meant to the minorities of the Niger Delta. There are about 30 groups in that, former Biafra, but it's always been about the Igbos. Partly it's because they have powerful writers who have controlled the narrative of Biafra and project it out here. So the international community does not know that the Anangs and Ibibios and Efiks and Shekiris and Robos and Ogonis, etc., etc. So I had always wanted to do this, to talk about this war from our perspective. I've always wanted to write an immigrant story. And then in 2006, my first book went into a long auction because many publishers were excited about it, which got me to visit many of these big American publishers. And I got to see that these were wide spaces. And I would walk in and I would be like, oh my goodness, this is so different from Times Square. This is so different from New York itself, which is very diverse, very cosmopolitan. And then if I ran into a fellow Black person or a minority, the person was very shocked to see me and uncomfortable. It was almost as if, it was a crime for them to greet me, whereas the white people had more freedom to say hello. So I picked this up very quickly. And I always thought one day I would write about this, because if these Black editors, Black publicists, these few people in the system are this uncomfortable and are suffering from the power dynamics, it means they've come to the home of people having voices, but they have no voice. So this has always been on my mind. And Nigerian food, African food, who knows what we eat? It could be stones. And if you mention African food, a lot of people run away. So it was my place to show them that some of these things we eat are already in your grocery stores. You know, they are not, it's not alien food. You know, it's only recent that Joe Biden has removed it, I think, from the from immigration lexicon, that we are no longer aliens, we are human beings. We've come to America. So you can see a lot of things were in my mind as I tried to, you know, to create this book. The other question you've asked is, you know, I write about Nigeria with a lot of emotional details. Yes, that's my country. That's where I was born. I know the Anangs, these are my people. It's my place to represent my people well. And I also write about America with all these details and emotional details because I want my American audience to also know I've done, you know, the work. I know what I'm talking about. Having said that, two of us are lucky, Elias. We share the same editor, Ellen. She's wonderful. We share the same publisher. So she was very helpful in giving me the confidence, you know, to write this book. And I did explain to her, we need a lot of Nigeria in this book. We need a lot of America in this book, because in a sense, we are dealing with two countries. I don't like immigrant stories where people come from chaos and they're very lucky to get to America and everything is very fine in America, except a few issues here and there. So it was my place to create a situation where, you know, America, they come, you know, Swiftian situation, if you like. Let me stop there. You may have other ways to push.
No, this is, I mean, this is all great. It's deeply insightful. I mean, I'm loving just hearing you talk and could, you know, do this for hours. I mean, I do want to ask, you know, because I think one other thing that you brought up that is really interesting, of course, is the narrator's job, right? So the narrator eventually gets, or, you know, not eventually, has this fellowship at this publishing house and is editing an anthology on the Biafran War. And part of what I think is really amazing about this in the book is that it means that you get to hear a lot of different stories, right? There's the story of the novel, but then every once in a while, the narrator will talk about a story that he's editing in the Biafran War anthology, or because he's at a publishing house, he will summarize a novel that he's read that the publisher is considering buying, or, you know, he will talk to a friend from back home and hear their experience of the Biafran War. And so this is a novel which is really amazing because in a kind of 1001 Nights kind of way, it's a novel of novels or of many stories, right? And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the form of the book, you know, what it was that drew you to talking about so many stories and so many different, from so many different perspectives.
Yeah, as a minority, and for many minorities, you will recognize even in this in your life. When you finally get a chance, sometimes you want to carry a lot of people along. You want to open the gate, the door for so many people. So when I started to write this, I became afraid. What about other minorities in Nigeria? Okay. And if I'm being honest with you, the Montana boy at the embassy came about because, you know, the thieves, it's a tribe in Nigeria, his own tribe, they were banging on my door when they are killing us. The Fulani headsmen are killing us. Write our story, right? I said, whoa, 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 leave me alone. And they said, how come you go and write about Rwanda? You've not even been there. The pain of the genocide, and you cannot write about our genocide here. So I had to, and I said, I'll do it. They said, it's taken you 10 years, you've not written another book. If we wait for you to write another book, these people could have finished us, could finish us. So I sat down and created that character, you know, just for the sake of the thieves. I wanted the world to see, you know, what the leadership of Nigeria is actually doing, empowering a tribe to wipe out other people. So I came up with that character. Luckily, it has worked. Even the Igbos, who did not know what we suffered in the war, some of them were asking me when they're killing us, they're bombing our towns and cities, even up till now. Could you say something about this? You know how to write about pain. I tried to wriggle out of it. I couldn't. So that has helped me shape the narrative so people get to see how complex these things are. And then, you know, I get here to America. So, you know, racism a lot of times is portrayed as black and white. And yes, because of the 400 years the African Americans have been here, they have seen hell. But I look at it, I'm like, Asian Americans are there, Latino Americans are there, Native Americans are there, all kinds of, you know, shades are in that spectrum. If the white people are not there, do all these people like black people? Do the Asians love black people? Do the Latinos love black people? You know, what is the story of racism in Latin America? Hence, you see me bring the Argentine story. And they basically sent black men at the end of slavery to the war front, the war with Paraguay, to be massacred. So there want to be black people in Argentina. And then they killed off the widows at home. The remnants, they drove them north to Brazil and other places, you know? So you know now what is happening in China. Do our black people have peace in China? I don't think so. In Asia, in India, those Indians who are black, who have a black skin, are they accepted? I don't think so. In Israel, the Ethiopian Jews were evacuated, you know, to Israel. It's a lot of fanfare. They have arrived there, and they're a bit darker than the white Jews. Are they accepted? You know, I don't think so. So it was my benefit to say, look, this is the album of our world. This is how we treat each other. We are invited to do better than we did yesterday. Even us black people, are we treating each other well? I know whiteness and colonization has shaped a lot of things, but we have at least a little agency to determine, even if we can't determine the whole picture, we can determine a bit. Like these Fulani headsmen who are killing and killing and killing, you know, did Britain ask them to do this? Did America ask them to do this? Did Germany ask them to do this? They were killing our brothers and sisters. Why? So that's where I'm coming from. I'm a super minority. Back home, I have almost no place. I come to the US and I'm facing this racism. So that's how you get to see even the small girl, Ujai, who is very hopeful, but she's already fighting racism at age 9.
This is good because that was beautiful. Yeah. So one of the other things I haven't brought up is that, of course, there's this transnational family relationship that's happening that the book is narrating, right? So the narrator gets to New York and finds that, kin who are in the Bronx. I won't reveal anything about the person who's awaiting him in New Jersey Tuesday, but there's a surprise on the way about this, man Tuesday, who you hear a lot about in the book. And of course, the narrator is also on the phone with his wife, and he's going to maintain a relationship even though he is across the world from her. And I think that you capture really quite beautifully the ways in which those kinds of kinship networks can traverse national and geographical boundaries at the same time that they are made more difficult by those kinds of boundaries. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that and how the book, you know, what you were interested in depicting in your sort of representations of Nigerians across the diaspora still being in conversation with each other at home, in the Bronx, wherever.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing there is when you go abroad, a part of your soul is still back home. You know, your folks, the Jamaicans in this country, they are still thinking about home. The Haitians, they're thinking about home. They send a lot of money back home to help their relatives, okay? But then in the age of social media, that communication is easier because WhatsApp, emails.
No more phone cards.
So it was easy for me to build the story around these tools to constantly show Nigeria, other parts of the world. And, but for me at first, it was very functional because I wanted Nigeria and America to be in the book. And at some point I envisioned a comparative portrait of the histories of violence in both countries, America and Nigeria. It shouldn't surprise you that Jamaica, your place, has not really had the kind of tribal war that we've had, but in the eyes of the world, of white folks, you guys are Black, violent people.
Right.
Yeah. Nobody remembers, you know, they said one day, why do they have to kill 1 million of their people? Nobody remembered that you know, Germany killed 6 million Jews. 6 million. It's a white country. It was the most educated country on earth when it did that. Nobody remembers what the Russians did, you know, 20 million, you know, but once it's Africa, oh, why are they doing this? So I wanted a situation where at least my white viewers, my white readers, instead of saying these Africans are violent, they would begin to see that, you know, this country sponsored Tuskegee and went and inflicted the Black men of Tuskegee with syphilis for 40 years, not 3 days, not 1 year, 40 years. Those people, as they struggle with this, it changed the shapes of their skulls. They became ugly. It changed their body structure. It burnt off their genitals. Nobody cared. The experiment had to continue. How can you say we are more violent than you? You see how these sharecroppers who were hanged on trees, 200 of them in neighborhoods, you know, each tree would have like 10 people, and white children and white people would go and look at this and touch their, you know, their toes as they're hanging and smiling. With these people are dead, their tongues are hanging out, you know, when you're hanged, you know, it's so to see that kind of thing. How can you say we are more violent than you? And let's not forget, you know, the Europeans killed 60 million Native Americans to take over this land. Okay, so at least there should be this humility that we are like you in everything, especially violence. Okay, it's bad enough to kill one person. So if the Biafran war kills one person, 10, that's bad enough. Okay, but you are not in a position since you have been like this, to be condemning other people. You should be helping them get over this. Okay, so this was very conscious in my thinking. As I'm going to show you the pain of the Biafran War, just stay in your lane, look inward, look in your heart, and try to see, as a nation, have we done this ourselves? And once you come to that acknowledgement that yes, then you should look at the other people with empathy and see them as human beings like you. So I'm putting this in front of American children because American children, English children, children of the West have been protected so much from knowing, from learning, these things. Some of them who begin to know, they begin to say, oh, okay, we can see why these Black people are so uncomfortable. Okay. And what can we do? This is why we have allies among white people now, more and more, joining our marches, protesting with us, okay? But also the supremacists, the white supremacists, they're pushing back. Publishing, after George Floyd, is trying to reorganize its ethos itself to be inclusive. My fear is if we just go home and not write the kind of book I have written, they can quickly forget. And, the clap back from the white supremacist may wash away the little gains, we have made in publishing.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing, or I should say, I see that we have one question. I'm going to be selfish and ask one final question, but please, if you have any questions in the audience, do enter them into the chat. One thing that about the book that is really quite magnificent is that you can feel all of this tension, but so often it's narrated through, of course, infestation. So the narrator at one point in the book gets bed bugs. And if you haven't read this book, I think for this alone, you should read the book. I mean, this is certainly the best portrait of bed bugs I've ever seen. It's so felt. I constantly found myself like scratching as I was reading the book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the bed bugs. Why bed bugs? What's going on here?
Elias, you won't let me have peace.
I have to know. We got to talk about the bed bugs.
Okay, here is the deal. Before I touch the bed bugs, I have a history of writing my stories as if I experienced, what the main character is experiencing. So when I wrote an Xmas feast about Kenya, and it was published in the New Yorker, Kenyans started sending me emails in this country to come and attend their national meeting because they thought I was Kenyan. And I explained to them, so they didn't write me again. I said, I would like to come, but I'm not Kenyan. So then I would go to do readings, and somebody would say, the street kids scenes are so real. When did you stop being a street kid? And I said, I was never a street kid. I'm not from Kenya. I'm from Nigeria. I was never a street kid. Then at the same reading, someone will say, oh, but when did your sister stop being a prostitute? And I'll have to say, look, I don't have sisters in real life, but I count this as a blessing because it means I've been able to hit hard and make it look plausible, feel real. It was the same thing with my Rwandese story. The Rwandese started writing me thinking I was from Rwanda. So when I was writing this New York, my city, my novel, I wanted to do the same thing. I wanted to write as if I really knew and grew up in New York City. But I had help this time. because I had bed bug infestation in New York City. And it bit me in 2 places on my ribs. Enough for me to spray like every 2 days so that they would not, even when they had stopped, I did not trust that they had stopped. And I spoke to many New Yorkers. They have refused for me to acknowledge them even in the book because of the shame and the taboo. They don't want to be known worldwide as people who had naiko. That's what we call it in my language, naiko. So with these 2 bites on my ribs, I was able to escalate this to all the bites that Ekong has. You know, all the bites on his neighbors, all the bites in, you know, in New York City. When you have bed bugs, you are so ashamed, you are so afraid you will export it to your office, to the train station. I mean, you know, the subway has been, the metro system has been shut down from time to time because of bed bugs. You know, Victoria's Secret had bed bugs. They had to, to shut it down. You know, is that not very intimate? You wouldn't think. Okay, and Mr. Clinton had bed bugs in his office. You know, they had to shut it down when he started living in New York. So it was very clear in my mind that I had to portray this. And I wanted my readers to feel what it means to have bed bugs in New York City because of the housing, how it is, you know, it goes from this apartment to that apartment, you fight it here, it goes there, you fight it there, it comes back here. So I was in that sense lucky that it mirrored the war, the tribal wars we are fighting back home. You know, the constant realignment of the tribes. It also mirrors how racism, what it's doing in this country. We try to stop black-white racism, and then suddenly they are shooting Asians. You try to stop it, suddenly they are shooting Mexicans, okay? And this bigotry, you know, it's constantly moving beyond us and affecting our children. For minorities, especially for African Americans who have lived here for 400 years. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. I hope we can find another world. Humanity, we are capable of changing these things. Okay.
That was such a beautiful final note. I'm not going to ask you any more questions, but I am going to ask you this audience question from David Malman asking, Uwem, I would love for you to talk about how you came up with the terrific title, New York, My Village, which is truly an amazing title. That was me, not David. David again is saying, and why you felt that this title was right for the book.
Okay. First of all, I've always been told if you want your essay to do well, your book to do well, you begin with the title. That's what people will see, you know, first. So once I came up with New York, My Village, I liked it so much. Excuse me. The short story that I wrote first, from which this novel came, you know, was called Mr. Lucci and His Friends. Okay.
Wow.
Yes, Mr. Lucci and His Friends. But once it began to grow towards being a novel, I wanted to shift the focus from Mr. Lucci, you know, to the city. And basically what I am saying is the children who are born in New York City, the most iconic, powerful city in this country, and the children who are born, say, in this fictional place in an land called, you call it Itono. When they're born, they're the same. They don't know anything. they grow up and pick up New York. These ones grow up and pick up Ikoriton Mekanman. Okay. So our essential humanity, is the same. The New Yorkers, they want joy, they want jobs, they want peace, they want happiness. The people of Ikoriton, they want jobs, they want peace, they want happiness. Okay. Where they are is what is shaping them. The reality is this, they see. So I wanted to say, look, these New Yorkers, in spite of what they think, you are not very different from the people of my village. Okay? You're not. You have small issues like Naiko, bed bugs. And you're running away from this. And you don't even want writers like me to write about this and tell the world that this is what you are suffering from. Okay. So it was a way of trying to, I've built my small village around Ecom, where he goes to work, his friends in New York, his neighbors, and they love each other, they hate each other, they fight, they reconcile, they love each other. This is life. So David, that's how I came up with that title. I hope you like it.
Thank you for answering that. Are there any other questions from the audience? I'm going to give us a quick second. Here we go. Jenny from Boswell. New York, my village veers between heartbreaking and hilarious. Which scene did you enjoy writing the most?
First of all, now that I've seen Jenny's last name, Jenny, thank you for the wonderful review of this book you sent to us. The only reason we could not put it out there and celebrate it to the moon and the sun was because we're talking about conflict of interest. So we decided to downplay this, but I was very happy with the review you gave. You really read, the book. What was very joyous to write? The food scenes. The food. Each time I had to describe the food, I was so happy. The different dishes, in New York. I like to go out and just eat different dishes from different ethnic groups around New York City. If you ask my brother in Nigeria what I do when I land in Nigeria, I go around the place eating, big restaurants, small restaurants, roadside vendors. I just like to test it all. So writing about food made me very, so very excited. Wherever I could really go after the humor, it made me very excited. My best place in New York, I love Chelsea a lot. I think it has to do with the High Line. The first time I went on that High Line, it was so beautiful. I really enjoyed it. So when I succeeded, when I saw I could put it in my novel, and I did, and it worked, I was so, so happy. Even the painful scenes, whenever I was able to capture them, it made me happy. I'm not happy about, the pain, but the fact that I could almost take a picture of this scene. So I'd always wanted to write an iconic scene, iconic church scene, like the baptism scenes in The Godfather. So when you see me go to New Jersey and work on it, I'm very happy because I think readers will remember what happened in that church in New Jersey. I've always wanted to put something in my story or in my novel that would be as powerful, frightening, menacing as the big fish in the movie Jaws, the big shark. This was Bird Box in New York City. So, Jenny, I cried a lot writing this book. I laughed a lot. It beat the shit out of me 13 years. I cannot thank God enough. I cannot thank my friends enough. All the African Americans who said, when this has to be done, figure out a way to write also about our issues. All the Latino Americans, all the Asian Americans, the Native Americans, the white Americans, who actually, each time my work was rejected, they said to me, when this is publishing, we know what you're writing is true. Keep going, you'll find an editor who has enough power and conviction and poise to help you with this. They helped me do research. For me, these white people who are our allies in the fight for equality, I cannot forget YADO cooperation. Elaine Richardson, the president, and Pat Towers, who is on the board of YADO, and Christy Davis, who works at YADO. When I was really in pain and lost and not know what to do with this book, they figured out a way and flew me from Gainesville, Florida to Saratoga Springs in New York City. I read, to them, and then they had so many parties for me in 3 days. They were trying to revive my spirit. And then they connected me with other writers who were also struggling. That little community, to see what YADO does for, the writers, the artists, I'll never forget, this. So you can see, Elias, that the acknowledgement is 25 pages.
So long. Never read acknowledgements longer in my life.
Yeah, I felt I had to thank so many people to let the world also know and see what it takes to write a book. Okay? Wherever I go to do a reading, people always ask me, how do you find an agent? What does an agent do with the manuscript? When it gets to an editor, what does the editor do with the manuscript? Who makes this final decision? Uwem, how do you do your research? So I wanted to put this in the hands of writers, especially the young ones, because we are encouraging people to write. And a lot of people are trying to write beyond their gender, their race, their culture. So I wanted to put this in their hands to say this one way, just one way to do it. So thank you, Jenny.
I think that gratitude is almost always the right place to end. So perhaps we should cut the conversation short for now and maybe think of this as until we have the next book. Daniel, would you mind hopping back on to close us out? I just wanted to say again, the unfortunate thing about me is that I somehow lost my jacket cover to New York, my village. So I just have this red book, but that's the jacket cover that Daniel has. We've talked about so much tonight, and I want to emphasize this is truly an amazing book. And I cannot stress enough how goddamn funny this book is. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to imagine that any book could be funny because I don't really laugh very much when I read. This book had me fucking rolling. So amidst all of the seriousness that we talked about today, if you're just looking for probably the best laughs you'll get this year, this is definitely the book to read. And Uwem, thank you so much for spending the time answering all of these beautiful questions so well.
Elias, I can't thank you enough. You gotta come back. You are from Florida. Come and visit
Wow.
us. Come home. Come home.
I always want to come home. I mean, I'm there. Just let me know.
You definitely have to do an event together in person. That would.
Yes. And thank you, Daniel. Thank you so much.